words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom then shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom then shall I be afraid? Well, the Pharisees in today's gospel have a pretty good answer to that question from the psalmist of who should you be afraid? Herod. You should be afraid of Herod. Herod wants to kill you, Jesus, and you'd better run. In some ways, the Pharisees' message to Jesus is almost compassionate, right? Warning someone that a worldly leader has it out for them and that they are in danger is a compassionate thing. Look out. So you'd better leave here. This is not a safe place for you. But Jesus, full of what Canon Anita referred to on Wednesday in our Bible study as holy boldness, calls out Herod's threats by calling him a fox and shrinking that scheming and frightened and pathetic dictator down to a fluffy farm animal. And says in essence, out of the way, Herod. I have things to do, and you have no power to stop my work. Jesus is not afraid. Jesus knows who he is. Jesus knows what his mission is. And Jesus knows that Herod only has power over earthly things, not divine things. It's satisfying to read a gospel like this and watch a dictator shrunk down to size, as we probably all know right now, or want to know anyway, as we watch a fight between a dictator who is not as powerful as he imagines he is, and a Jewish man. And I wonder, with Jesus' holy boldness and his standing up for the ministry and the mission that he is doing, and his challenge that Herod does not have authority over the work that Jesus has come to do. I wonder how that message got taken back to Herod's palace. I wonder if part of why Herod decided to support Jesus' execution at the hands of the Roman Empire is because he heard that Jesus did not acknowledge his authority over him, that Jesus was not afraid, so that Herod doubled down and really wanted to show Jesus who was boss and who had the upper hand. But in the worldly game of trying to be all-powerful, there's always a bigger fish. Jesus does not end Herod's earthly reign. His kingdom is not of this world. But Herod's nephew did. And Rome did. Herod was accused of treason and died in exile. Rome took over the Herodian era, and eventually Rome gets conquered too. And so the psalmist, as he is speaking today and in other psalms, focusing on how that we will never be as powerful as God. So who should we be afraid of? If our hope is in God, then earthly powers only have earthly powers over us. God has heavenly charge of things. The gospel points us today to the cross, and it's pointing us to the inevitable showdown between Jesus and the authorities, between goodness and sin. And we as followers of Jesus, don't get off entirely freely as we read it. We hear Jesus' holy boldness and his confession that, I can die and you will not win to Herod. But we do get afraid. And we do not always respond with holy boldness to fear of earthly powers. And Jesus, as he encounters the people around him, brings not just the knowledge of who he is and the commitment to his mission, but Jesus also brings his grief at the fact that he knows he is going to Jerusalem, and he knows that as much as he would like to gather the people of Israel and all the people under his wings into safety, that they will not be safe. They will be running around, doing things that put them in danger. And that is a lesson for us. That's a message for us as we hear it. Because often we are not in the position of the strong Jesus calling out with holy boldness the words of earthly authorities. Often we're the chicks who are running around and getting lost and running around in places where the hawks can come and pick us off. And thinking about that this week reminded me of one of the more amusing but also sad news stories I heard this week about the New York hiker that was hiking up in Flagstaff. And he hiked on Humphreys Peak about a week ago, and he had to call 911 because he got stuck, he got lost. So he called 911. They came, they picked him up, they brought him back down the mountain, they rescued him. And the very next day, he hiked Humphreys Peak again, and he had to call for help again. And this time they really said to him, "You know, sir, you ought not to be hiking here. Please do not." And as much as when one of my relatives sent that to me and said, "Hey, you're from New York and you like to hike. Was this you?" No. I felt, how many of us upon hearing of that story felt superior, right? Like that would never happen to me. If I had to call for help to get off a mountain, I might do that once, but I would definitely not do it the second day. But do we not do that with Jesus all the time? Every day. Every day in our lives where we fall into sin and where sometimes we have the good sense to call to Jesus and say, "Jesus, help!" But sometimes we don't even call because we don't realize we're lost, and we don't realize we need to be saved, and we don't realize that we're in danger. And so when Jesus today has that achingly beautiful line, "How often I have wanted to gather you all under my wings, but you would not listen." That's to us. That we're the hikers who are wandering off and not taking shelter in the wings. Because that is where the shelter is. We're out there looking for shelter somewhere else. I had a good conversation with my dad actually a couple weeks ago about Psalm 121, which is this beautiful psalm. We all know it. "I will lift up mine eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." And I pointed out to him that most people read that psalm saying, "I lift up my eyes from the hills, from whence cometh my help," thinking that the psalmist is saying, "I lift up my eyes to the hills," and the help is coming from the hills. Like the help is like an army or something that's on the top of the hill that's going to come rescue us. That's not what that means. The psalm says, "I lift up my eyes to the hills." Where is my help coming from? And then the next line, "My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." The help comes from not the hills, but from God. And that if we are looking to invading armies from the hillsides, we're looking in the wrong place. We're called to not be afraid of whatever is on that hillside, because the psalmist is not saying that what's on the hillside is good or healthy. But we're called to know that even if there is the hosts of hell on top of that hillside, God is in the person in whom we have our trust. Jesus is the one that gives us the strength to not be afraid. And as the psalm continues, today's psalm, it continues to this vision of all I want to do is be in Jerusalem and in the temple where, therefore, I will offer in his dwelling an oblation with sounds of great gladness. I will make music and sing. I will sing and make music to the Lord. When the civil rights leaders were training for how to march and how to remain nonviolent, one of the instructions that's been passed down for decades now is, if you're scared, sing. If you're scared and you don't know what to do, sing something, and that will help focus you. It will help you remember to not be afraid. And I learned this week that the song "We Shall Overcome," the verse "We Are Not Afraid," was added to it by a woman named Jamila Jones, who grew up in Alabama, and she was at the Highlander Folk School for Nonviolent Activist Training when it was raided by the police, who shut off all the lights in the building. And she found the strength to sing out into the darkness, adding "We Are Not Afraid" to the song "We Shall Overcome." And she said, and we got louder and louder with singing that verse until one of the policemen came out and he said to me, "If you have to sing," and he was actually shaking, "do you have to sing so loud?" And I could not believe it. Here these people had all the guns, the billy clubs, the power, we thought. And he was asking me while he was shaking if I would not sing so loud. And it was that time that I really understood the power of our music. Think of Jesus singing today, really. We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we are not afraid today. Where is it that we are called to sing that song today? Who is it who is singing that song, that confidence that they are not afraid today? And where is it that our eyes go to seek help when we know we need to be rescued? Amen.